Lorraine Harper didn't even look up when she said it. You're in violation of Article 12.3. Emergency vehicle access must not obstruct landscaping or visual cohesion. The word violation hit harder than it should have. My wife hadn't even finished vomiting blood into the paramedics' gloved hands when that notification popped up on my phone. Lorraine must have seen the ambulance pull away, because less than 6 minutes later, the fine hit my inbox. $500. Unauthorized lawn access, screenshot included. I stared at it. At the frozen still of Elena, my wife, being wheeled out in a gown soaked with crimson, her face blurred by shadows. But I knew that profile, that frail arm, that angle. The camera had to be hidden near the bench, near the garden gnome by the fountain. I looked up, and for the first time, I realized this wasn't a warning, it was a trophy. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I stepped out of the hospital elevator with the still image in hand, walked straight to the HOA clubhouse. Lorraine was rearranging flyers, something about new mulch guidelines. She didn't flinch when I laid the photo down. You use this to fine me? I asked. She adjusted the corner of a paper towel. The rule's the rule, Mr. Maddox. I nodded once. That camera's recording an ADA-protected health crisis, and I'm the HIPAA compliance officer for St. Agnes Medical. She blinked just once, but the rest of her face stayed smug. It always amazed me how people could wear arrogance like armor, even when they had no idea what war they'd just walked into. My name's Sean Maddox. I moved to Cypress Ridge with my wife Elena after her third seizure incident forced us to downsize and move closer to her care team. We picked this place because of its quiet, because of the bench she loved by the water, because we thought the cameras were just for gates and mailboxes, not for watching a woman collapse in her own hallway and get carted into a van while her neighbor screenshot the moment. That footage was personal, it was trauma on loop, and Lorraine used it like she was managing inventory. It wasn't just about the fine, it was the casual way she dismissed it, the refusal to delete it from the HOA server when I asked, the next-door neighbor who whispered, "She's been watching everyone." The anonymous message I got 2 nights later with nothing but a subject line, "You're not the only one." The clubhouse still smelled like pine disinfectant. Posters lined the wall with phrases like, "Community comes first," and "Neighbors, not numbers." A crock-pot burbled behind the desk. Lorraine's chili cook-off submission for the weekend gathering. I imagined her stirring that pot while watching the security feeds, flagging anyone who stepped too far into a flower bed. My wife was recovering in room 428. She'd asked me why the neighborhood was so quiet. I couldn't tell her that the footage had already been seen, blurred and re-uploaded in the HOA group chat with a caption, "This is why we have rules." I didn't care about the fine anymore. I cared about the silence in the street. I cared about the camera in the gnome. I cared that my wife asked me, half-drugged, if she'd embarrassed the HOA. And I cared that Lorraine Harper, the woman who claimed to protect the image of this neighborhood, wasn't protecting anyone. She was feeding on control, recording us like property, turning health into policy violations. So I stood in that clubhouse and didn't raise my voice. I didn't rip down the flyers or slam the fine onto her table. I just looked at her, still smoothing paper edges, and said, "I'm going to make this very public, Lorraine. You don't get to record someone dying and call it enforcement." Her reply, "You'll regret threatening me." I smiled. "You're going to regret putting that footage online." Because she didn't know what I'd already started. She didn't know the media request I'd just answered. And she had no idea what happens when you corner a man whose whole job is exposing illegal access to protected information. Now it's your turn. Where are you watching from? Lorraine Harper didn't stop with the footage. The morning after our confrontation at the clubhouse, a new post appeared on the HOA bulletin board, this time physical, tacked next to the mailbox cluster. Reminder: emergency services must not obstruct landscaping zones. Repeat violations may result in suspension of community privileges. She never used names. She didn't have to. Everyone in Cypress Ridge had seen the image. Even if they pretended not to look, their silence spoke louder than any fine. Elena was asleep upstairs, her breathing shallow. I sat at the dining room table, the bulletin still in my hand, wondering how a neighborhood built on clean sidewalks and trimmed hedges could make you feel so exposed. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. Lorraine had weaponized policy into surveillance. Every street lamp, every decorative post light, every little birdhouse fixture now felt suspect. I realized I hadn't seen any notice of camera installations in the HOA meeting notes. No budget approval, no line items marked security expansion. Just sudden eyes, watching, and the fines kept coming. 2 more citations landed that week. One for improper waste bin placement. Our trash cans were out 15 minutes early because Elena had a follow-up appointment. The other accused me of aggressive posture during the prior HOA visit. That one came with a warning that my behavior would be documented in the interest of community cohesion. It wasn't just us anymore. Our neighbor 3 doors down, Mrs. Hargrove, was fined for hosting unsanctioned gatherings. Her daughter had visited with her 2 toddlers for the weekend. Another resident, a disabled veteran named Curtis, received a warning about non-compliant ramp structures, despite his ramp being installed with a city permit 5 years ago. And still, no one said anything publicly. But I started to notice the glances, the slow nods. One man held the clubhouse door open for me longer than necessary and muttered, "Careful, she's on a power trip," then looked away like he'd confessed a sin. I knew the signs. I'd seen them in hospital systems, teams too afraid to challenge authority, watching patients suffer because paperwork meant protection. Lorraine wasn't just enforcing rules, she was punishing disobedience. I needed to know how deep her reach went. So, I drove to City Records the next day, took the elevator up to the planning and development floor, and requested permits for Cypress Ridge under the HOA's name. The woman behind the desk, tired and overworked, handed me a thick file with a raised brow. "You're not the first." That sentence stopped me. I asked what she meant. She shrugged. "We've had, inquiries. Not everyone agrees with your HOA's definition of surveillance." That word again. Surveillance. When I opened the file, I found maintenance requests, landscaping approvals, architectural changes, but nothing on camera installation. No declarations of new security systems, no vendor contracts, no tax forms. Just a clean record where red flags should have been. And tucked between all the stamped papers was a short memo from 2 years prior, barely legible. Motion passed. HOA president granted discretionary authority for community enhancements. Discretionary authority. That was her loophole. She didn't ask for votes. She buried the spending under ambiguous budget tags and kept the board blind. Or maybe they weren't blind. Maybe they were just quiet. As I flipped through the pages, something else fell out, a printed complaint from last year. Resident reports feeling observed in their backyard, possible privacy concern. It was initialed EC, Evan Carver, the HOA treasurer. I remembered him. Quiet, calculated, never spoke unless the vote needed him to. The kind of man who knew where the money came from, but never admitted where it went. That memo wasn't just evidence of overreach, it was a thread. And Lorraine had pulled it too far. When I walked out of City Records that day, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, but I also felt something else. The shift. The slow churn of something buried finally beginning to surface. Because it wasn't just about my wife anymore. Lorraine had created a culture of silence, a network of watchers and watched, and someone, at least one person, had already tried to speak up. I just had to find out why they stopped. I found Evan Carver behind the folding table at the HOA recycling drive. He was labeling bins with neat handwriting, sleeves rolled up, glasses fogging in the heat. The kind of man who looked like he could itemize your soul into a spreadsheet and deduct the tax on it. Most people didn't give him more than a passing nod. But I watched the way his eyes followed Lorraine across the lot, sharp and careful, like he was measuring something. I waited until the last resident dropped off their bundle of newspapers before I walked up. "Mind if I ask you something?" I said. He looked up. "About recycling?" "About discretionary spending." He froze, marker tip hovering just above a label reading "glass only." His smile thinned. "That's a board-level discussion." I pulled a folded copy of the City Records memo from my pocket and slid it across the table. "You initialed a privacy complaint last year, and you approved Lorraine's Community Enhancement Fund. I'm just wondering which one keeps you up at night." His eyes flicked to the page. A muscle moved in his jaw. He didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he capped the marker slowly, deliberately, like he needed something to do with his hands. "Don't do this here," he said under his breath. "Not in front of everyone." "Then where?" I asked. "You had a chance to raise your hand. You didn't." "She filmed my wife during a medical emergency. Evan." He closed his eyes for half a second, too fast to be dramatic, too slow to be meaningless. Then he leaned in. "I didn't know about the Gnome cameras," he muttered. "She kept those under a discretionary expense tagged as seasonal landscaping. I thought it was uplighting or perimeter accents, except now she's citing footage and violations." He nodded once stiffly. "I know. I've seen them, and you're still here," I said, his face twisted. "Because if I leave, she replaces me with someone worse. Someone who won't blink twice before signing off on full audio." That hit harder than I expected. Audio. "She's pushing for it?" I asked. He didn't answer directly, just picked up a cardboard box and started walking toward the clubhouse storage closet. I followed. Inside, surrounded by stacked chairs and event banners, he finally turned to face me. "I tried to push back," he said. "Last quarter, she threatened to strip me of Treasury access if I obstructed security upgrades. Said I'd be responsible if there was a break-in." "Did anyone else on the board object?" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "One, he moved last month, said he wanted to live somewhere with less paperwork and more trees." I looked around the closet. There was a box labeled Holiday Assets, another marked Safety Audit Reports, and beneath that, a binder labeled Vendor, Night Garden Security, Line 17, G-Unit Install, Approved. "Line 17?" I asked, stepping closer. Evan reached forward and snapped the lid shut before I could touch it. "You didn't see that." "Come on, you didn't see it, Sean." I stood still. So did he. His hands were tight against the box, knuckles pale. "She's got backups," he said finally. "Footage archived. I don't know where she stores it. But it's not just this month. There's video going back over a year. And the board, they don't ask questions. She keeps them busy with flag colors and patio shade regulations." I leaned back against the shelving unit. "You're complicit." He flinched but didn't argue. Then he said something I didn't expect. "She filmed me too." Silence settled between us like dust. "In my own backyard." I didn't know until I saw the reflection in the sliding door. She denied it, said the angle was from the street, but I know what I saw. I waited. Evan looked at me, something brittle behind his expression. "I've wanted to speak out," he said, "but I don't have your credentials. I'm just a treasurer in a neighborhood that thinks cameras are cheaper than trust." I didn't pity him, but I understood him. He was the kind of man who kept quiet to keep the system running until the system turned on him. Now he was standing in a storage closet surrounded by lies, and he didn't know which box would collapse first. "I'm not asking you to be a hero," I said. "Just help me pull the thread." He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. And that was more than I'd gotten from anyone else. 2 days later, a notice appeared taped to my front door. Final warning: hostile conduct during HOA event. Next infraction may result in community sanction. I stood on the porch with the paper in my hand, fingers curled tight around the edge. It was printed on thick ivory cardstock, the kind Lorraine liked to use for formal announcements, like fall decor contests and pancake brunches. But there was no brunch this time, just a thinly veiled threat. Inside, Elena sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders. Her skin was pale again. The stress was getting worse. She hadn't been sleeping, and neither had I. "They're pushing harder," I told her. She looked over, tired but calm. "Let them." She always said things like that. Simple, true, unshaken. But I could see the fear in her eyes, just below the surface. The kind that makes your hands shake when the doorbell rings. The kind that makes your own home feel like enemy territory. Lorraine wasn't backing off. She was doubling down. Her surveillance network had grown more aggressive. New temporary observation units had sprouted near the fountain, the mailboxes, and even the tennis courts. They were small, sleek, disguised as decorative fixtures. No notices, no neighbor votes, just appearances. I needed to act before someone else was dragged into this. I drove to the community office to review the violation in person. Lorraine wasn't there, but her assistant, A smug young woman named Rena was happy to deliver the script. Your behavior at the recycling event was flagged by 2 residents as confrontational and verbally aggressive, she said without looking up from her screen. Did those residents include Lorraine Harper? I asked. She didn't answer. Was I recorded again? Her fingers paused over the keyboard. There is no public footage associated with this warning, she said flatly. But there is private footage. She stood up, smoothing her blouse. Mr. Maddox, if you have a concern about HOA governance, you're welcome to submit a formal petition. Otherwise, you are not permitted in the office without appointment. I held her gaze for a beat. I'll be submitting something. Back in my car, I stared at the dashboard. This wasn't about fines anymore. This was about suffocating opposition, quietly, procedurally. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust me, and I wasn't the only one. That night, I received a message through an anonymous email account. No greeting, no sign-off, just a link to a password-protected Dropbox folder labeled watch_this. I clicked. Inside were 7 short video clips, shaky, low-res security camera captures with distorted audio. They were all from within Cypress Ridge. One showed Curtis, the disabled veteran, struggling to carry groceries up his ramp, while Lorraine filmed from her car window. Another showed Mrs. Hargrove's grandkids riding tricycles in her driveway, followed by a citation about unauthorized recreational use. Another showed me, standing on the porch the night Elena collapsed, waving down the ambulance, my hands trembling. Every clip was time-stamped. Every clip had been used in an HOA action, and none of them had consent. I scrolled down and found a final file, text only, a note. She has more. I got these before I left the board. This is only what I could extract without raising flags. You're not crazy. You're not alone. It wasn't signed, but I knew who sent it. Evan. He hadn't said yes in the closet, but now, here it was. His first move. He'd seen the machine from inside, and now, maybe, he wanted to dismantle it. I downloaded everything, made backup copies. Then I turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and listened to my wife breathe. This wasn't just HOA harassment. This was targeted surveillance, manufactured infractions, systematic humiliation dressed as community standards. And for the first time, I had more than suspicion. I had proof. Lorraine had crossed a line. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was documenting it like property. And now, I was holding her camera angles in my hand. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, not entirely. My mind just wouldn't stop calculating angles. Camera placement, line of sight, how long it would take to sweep the park for hidden units without drawing attention. The footage Evan sent played on a loop in my head, each frame a violation that no one had consented to, each still a quiet betrayal. At sunrise, I left Elena a note and walked to the park. It was early. Barely anyone was out yet. Just birds rustling in the hedges and the occasional sprinkler hiss as the irrigation system kicked in. The bench near the fountain sat quiet and clean, the same bench Elena and I used during her recovery walks. The one place that used to feel safe. I sat down and looked around. At first, nothing stood out, but then I saw it, tucked just behind a new patch of ornamental grass. A decorative garden gnome. Harmless if you weren't looking closely. But the eyes, they didn't catch light like ceramic. They reflected it, perfectly flat, perfectly black. Lens glass. I stood slowly and circled behind it. There, beneath a bed of pine mulch, was a small metal plate, bolted into a hidden bracket. The label etched into it read, Night Garden G Unit 17. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. That was the line from the binder Evan had nearly let me read. Lorraine had disguised surveillance equipment as decorative lawn art. These weren't standard HOA security measures. This was covert hardware, installed without notice, funded through ambiguous budget lines. The gnome faced the fountain. More specifically, it faced the bench. I sat again, let my hands rest on my knees, and imagined Elena here, laughing through labored breath, curled in my coat. We used to sit and talk about nothing. She'd feed the birds. I'd read her case summaries aloud just to make her smile. And all the while, that thing had been watching, recording, archiving. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. I opened a private folder I kept for work, normally used for hospital evidence logs. I added a photo of the gnome, GPS tagged, time-stamped, then another from the rear, showing the bracket. I pulled up the vendor catalog for night guard and security. Their public site showed G units as experimental community devices, only legal in states with broad communal consent. Florida didn't qualify. Cypress Ridge had never held a vote. This was illegal surveillance tech, disguised as landscaping. When I returned home, Elena was up. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea between her hands. Her fingers trembled when she lifted it. "They sent another letter," she said softly. I glanced down. Another envelope. Same paper stock, same seal. Notice of scheduled compliance review. They were escalating. "They want to inspect the property," she continued. "On Tuesday." I took a slow breath, then sat across from her. "Elena," I said, "you remember the bench?" She nodded. "There's a hidden camera in the gnome." She didn't react at first, just looked at me. Then her mouth parted, eyes widening just slightly, as if something fragile inside her cracked. "All those days," she whispered. "I know." I placed my hand over hers. She squeezed back. "I'm going to expose this," I said. "Publicly. I'm done playing by Lorraine's rules." She nodded, eyes wet. "She'll come after you," she said. "I'm counting on it." I stood, turned toward my home office, and opened the encrypted drive I hadn't touched since the last hospital arbitration, the one I kept for emergency documentation, policy analysis, evidence chain reports. Then I opened a new folder. Cypress Ridge, surveillance pattern. Lorraine had filmed the wrong wife, and now I was going to bring the right storm. The letter said they'd arrive at 3 p.m. sharp. A compliance review, signed by Lorraine herself, citing concerns over unapproved structural adjustments and aggressive demeanor. No photos, no specifics, just a threat wearing a tie. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of my own house, not out of fear, out of preparation. Every angle, every siding panel, every corner of the lawn. I made a note of the 2 new solar lanterns Lorraine's crew had installed near the storm drain. Decorative, she claimed, but both pointed directly toward our bedroom windows. I documented them, logged the shadows they cast. At 2:45, Elena moved to the back of the house. She wasn't strong enough to stand through an inspection, and I didn't want her anywhere near the conversation. She hadn't slept well since the last letter arrived. She still flinched every time the mailbox clanged. At 2:58, a black Lexus pulled into our driveway. Lorraine stepped out with her clipboard already open. Behind her was a man in slacks and a Cypress Ridge polo. I didn't recognize him, probably one of her newer compliance officers. Young, sharp haircut, the kind of guy who still thought rule enforcement came with prestige. I opened the door before they rang the bell. "Afternoon," I said, calm and flat. Lorraine smiled like this was a garden tour. "Mr. Maddox, we appreciate your cooperation." I didn't answer, just stepped aside and let them in. They walked the house like it was a crime scene. Opened cabinets without asking, measured the distance between our porch railings, checked for unauthorized lighting modifications. Lorraine lingered at the kitchen sink and glanced at the medication organizer beside it. I stood silent, hands folded, recording everything with the discreet body cam clipped inside my collar. At one point, the officer leaned toward a bookshelf near the hallway. He pointed. "That window trim looks new." I turned. "That window came with the house. Original construction. Looks like the paint may not match HOA guidelines. It's factory color. The model's listed in your handbook appendix." Page 12, Lorraine scribbled something onto her clipboard. They moved through the rest of the house without comment. Then Lorraine paused at the back patio door. "You've removed one of the perimeter lights," she said. "No, I relocated it. It was shining directly into our bedroom all night. Your installer positioned it less than 6 feet from the window. That's a violation of the HOA's own luminosity policy." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You moved it without permission," she said. "I moved it in accordance with Safety Code 14.2, I replied, "which you cited yourself when denying Curtis's ramp adjustment." "I'm sure you remember." That stopped her, just for a second. Enough. When the inspection ended, they stepped out onto the front lawn. Lorraine turned back one last time. "There will be a follow-up notice," she said. I nodded once. "I'll be ready." They walked to their car in silence. I waited until the Lexus rounded the corner before I opened the encrypted folder on my laptop and uploaded the body cam footage to 3 separate cloud backups, time-stamped, audio captured, synced with HOA documentation. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in a favor. My old colleague from the hospital, Lena Dorsey, was now working with Channel 8 Investigates. She covered patient rights stories, especially ones involving data abuse and digital privacy violations. I left her a message and sent over a teaser of what I had: blurred faces, redacted timestamps, just enough to raise eyebrows. She responded within an hour. "Let's talk," she wrote. "This is bigger than HOA nonsense." I agreed, because it was. Lorraine wasn't just enforcing rules, she was curating fear, fabricating patterns of behavior through video, building a file on everyone in Cypress Ridge, and weaponizing it under the cover of community order. But now, I had a file of my own, and this time, someone was finally going to listen. Evan showed up at my door just after 9 p.m. No text, no call, just a single knock. When I opened it, he stood there with a hood over his head and a manila envelope clutched in both hands like it weighed more than paper should. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like someone carrying contraband. We sat at the kitchen table, the envelope between us. Elena had already gone to bed. The lights were dimmed, only the faint hum of the fridge filled the room. He didn't speak at first, just kept looking at the envelope. "I wasn't going to bring this," he said, "but after the inspection, and after what she told me today, I couldn't let it sit anymore." He slid the envelope toward me. My fingers touched it, but I didn't open it yet. "She knows you contacted someone," he said. "Lorraine. She doesn't know who or how, but she's paranoid. Started asking about network access logs, file versions. She thinks someone's leaking from inside." I leaned back. "And you're worried she's right?" "She is," he said. His voice didn't shake, but his shoulders did. "She called an emergency board session this morning. No notice to residents, no public posting. Said it was a security coordination briefing. Really, it was just her laying down threats. She told us to start flagging every potential dissent as disruptive conduct. Wants to stack enough violations to suspend your membership. Writes, which removes my voting power," I said. He nodded. "She's trying to disqualify you before the next board cycle. Keep you from running. Silence you. Before anything hits the public." I opened the envelope. Inside were 6 printed pages. HOA budget amendments, security vendor notes, expense logs from the past 2 years. All with the same shell terms: enhancements, aesthetic improvements, safety allocations, each tied to a single vendor, Night Garden Systems. "She funneled nearly $30,000 through the discretionary clause," Evan said. "Used inflated landscaping bids to cover surveillance costs. Half the board didn't even notice. The rest didn't care, and you signed off." His jaw clenched. "Yes." Silence settled over us. I didn't let him off the hook, but I didn't throw the book at him either. "What changed?" I asked. He looked down at the table. "My daughter." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small photo. An elementary school headshot. Dark curls, blue dress, gap-toothed smile. He set it next to the envelope. "She came to stay with me last weekend. We played catch near the fountain. Laughed too loud, I guess. The next morning, I got a warning. Children at play must remain within approved recreation zones." He swallowed hard. "She was tagged on camera. Same camera that caught your wife." Lorraine sent me the clip. His hands were shaking now. "She sent me a clip of my daughter and told me to rein her in." I stared at the photo, at the envelope, at the man unraveling across my kitchen table, every trace of professional polish gone. "You're not the only one she's hurt," I said quietly. He nodded. "She's weaponizing documentation, using it to control behavior, eliminate dissent. And now it's bleeding into families. She threatened to remove me from the board," he added. "Said I've become emotionally compromised." "She's right," I said, "but not the way she thinks." Evan let out a breath that sounded like it had been sitting in his chest for weeks. "I don't have much left to lose," he said, "but if I'm going down, I want it to count." I picked up the envelope, stacked it with the digital files I'd compiled, and tapped the folder labeled "Witness Confirmed" on my screen. "Then let's make it count." He looked up. His eyes were clear now. "I'll testify," he said. "When the time comes." "I'll go on record," I nodded once. "Good," I said, "because the time is almost here. I spent the next 48 hours building the dossier. Every clip, every file, every expense log Evan handed over, I cataloged it all. I didn't just want a story. I wanted a pattern. I wanted a timeline Lorraine Harper couldn't wriggle out of. This wasn't about a single violation anymore. It was about power, misused and systematized under the illusion of neighborly order. Elena stayed quiet during most of it. She sat by, the window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the wind push leaves across the lawn. Her tea sat untouched. I knew the silence wasn't distance. It was her way of bracing, of letting me go as deep into this as I needed to. I laid out the first wave of evidence across the living room floor, 7 camera angles, 3 vendor contracts, multiple flagged fines issued within minutes of surveillance timestamps. The files Lorraine thought were buried in budget lines were now aligned on a color-coded spreadsheet, courtesy of Evan's annotations. One column struck me harder than the rest. Flag reason. Some were absurd. Loud child laughter, unauthorized garden hose use, prolonged porch occupancy. Others bordered on predatory. Limp detected during walk, frequent vehicle unloading, repeated medical transport presence. They'd flagged my wife's seizures as disturbances. I felt something hollow and sharp crack open in my chest. By the time the sun rose on the 3rd day, I had my package. I encrypted the main file into a read-only drive and sent the link to Lena Dorsey at Channel 8, investigates with a note. Final dossier. Multiple sources. Confirmed witness ready. ETA on air date? Her reply came in under an hour. Segment tentatively approved. Legal reviewing redactions now. On air within the week if cleared. We'll need your voiceover. And a location interview. I didn't hesitate. I typed back, "You'll get both." That evening, I met Lena and her field producer in the park, just before dusk, when the Gnome camera would still be active. I walked her through the setup, keeping my voice low. "That's the unit Lorraine used to capture my wife's medical event," I said, pointing subtly toward the decorative statue. Lena wore dark jeans, a utility jacket, and a mic clipped to her collar. Her camera operator nodded and began scanning B-roll. "We'll blur any footage of your wife," she said. "Only use audio where permitted." "She doesn't want her face shown," I said, but she gave me full approval to tell the story. Understood. We filmed the walkthrough first. I explained how the bench became our sanctuary, how Elena used to sit and watch birds, and how it never crossed our minds that it would be anything but private. Then we moved to the living room. I recorded the voiceover from my desk, headset on, each word slow and deliberate. I spoke not as a victim, but as someone who understood systems, someone who'd spent his career analyzing breaches and now found one hidden in the place he called home. "This isn't a story about a camera," I said into the mic. "It's about a boundary that was crossed, quietly, persistently, until it no longer looked like abuse. It looked like policy." We finished around midnight. Lena closed her laptop and looked at me across the table. "You know she's going to retaliate." "I'm counting on it," I said. "Why?" "Because that'll make her reckless. And the one thing you can count on with someone like Lorraine is that she never expects anyone to fight back with a bigger file than hers." Lena smiled, but there was no humor in it, just respect. I walked her out to the car, then stood alone in the driveway, watching the neighborhood glow under the low hum of faux gaslights. Tomorrow, Evan would give his statement. Channel 8 would finalize the broadcast script. And Lorraine? Lorraine would feel the quiet before the storm. The day before the broadcast, I activated the last phase of the prep. Community mobilization. It had to be quiet, subtle. No social media posts, no flyers, no open declarations. Lorraine still controlled the HOA communication channels, and if she caught wind of what we were building, she'd double the fines before dinner. So I worked behind the scenes. I started with Curtis. He answered the door with his left leg braced and his right hand gripping the walker tight. His eyes scanned my face like a soldier checking for uniforms. When he realized it was just me, his shoulders relaxed. "You saw the footage?" I asked. "I saw it," he replied. "Didn't expect to. But I'm glad I did," I nodded. "Would you speak to someone at Channel 8 if it helps stop this?" He didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Curtis wasn't the only one. Mrs. Hargrove invited me inside before I even knocked. Her daughter sat at the kitchen island, holding one of the HOA warnings in her hand like it was a mold report. "Lorraine cited me for child noise," she said, My kids were laughing on the porch. That's not a violation. That's a memory, Mrs. Hargrove added, her voice sharp and clear. We want her gone. By the end of the day, I had 8 families, all with similar stories, all silenced in different ways. One had been fined for too many wind chimes, another for sunlight glare from improper curtain use. It was laughable if it hadn't been so calculated. Lorraine had crafted a psychological chokehold, one infraction at a time. Evan met me that evening in my garage. He came with a flash drive. Testimony, he said. I recorded it myself. No filters, no edits. I plugged it into my laptop while he stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw clenched. On screen, Evan looked tired but composed. He gave his full name, position, and date. Then he began, My name is Evan Carver. I serve as treasurer on the board for Cypress Ridge. I am submitting this statement to confirm misuse of HOA discretionary funds, knowledge of unauthorized surveillance equipment, and documented retaliation against residents who questioned the board's actions. He laid it out plainly. He named Lorraine. He cited specific budget lines and timelines, explained how security costs were concealed in false landscaping bids, described the vote manipulations, and most importantly, he ended with, I no longer trust the leadership of our HOA. I have resigned my position, effective, immediately, and submit this testimony in hopes that transparency will return to this neighborhood. I hit pause. Evan stood still. That's everything, he said. I closed the laptop and extended my hand. He took it, firm grip, no hesitation this time. I can't undo what I signed off on, he said. No one's asking you to, I replied. But what you just did, that's how change starts. By midnight, Lena had the final edits, my voiceover, Evan's full statement. Curtis and Mrs. Hargrove, filmed in silhouette for privacy, giving on-record examples of citations and surveillance abuse. The news package was clocked at 6 minutes, primetime approved, scheduled to air the following evening, and while most of the neighborhood would find out then, a few more learn it early, by accident or whisper. At 6:43 a.m., I received a text from an unknown number. You think this makes you noble? You'll bring property values down. That's all. At 7:22, someone egged my mailbox. At 9:10, I watched Lorraine stand outside the clubhouse with 2 board members, speaking fast, hands slicing the air. One of them peeled off, phone already at his ear. She knew. The pressure was setting in. The camera in the garden gnome still blinked across from the bench. But I didn't flinch when I passed it, because this time, it was watching a man who wasn't afraid anymore, and Lorraine was about to find out what happened when you recorded the wrong family and underestimated the quietest guy on the street. The news van rolled into Cypress Ridge at 4:15 p.m. No branding on the side, no flashy setup. Just a quiet white vehicle with a camera crew inside and a reporter who looked like she'd done this dance before. Lena stepped out first, her blazer neat, heels silent against the concrete. She met me on the corner by the clubhouse. Segment's locked, she said. It airs at 6. You sure you're ready for what comes after? I nodded. We've already been living under surveillance. The difference now is, everyone will know it. She gave a small smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Good, because the board's not staying quiet. Your HOA president already called our legal department twice, claimed our footage was defamatory, and our legal team laughed. She never filed a privacy claim for herself. Just everyone else? The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Lena moved fast. Her crew set up across from the park, filming neutral B-roll, trees swaying, kids in the distance, the bench, the gnome. Meanwhile, I returned home and booted up my secure backup drive. I sent the final file to a pre-written mailing list I'd created the night before, neighbors who had reached out quietly, asking when they could see the full report. I attached a simple message. It airs tonight. We won't be silent tomorrow. Elena was in the kitchen when I returned. She looked stronger today, not because she felt better, but because she finally saw where this was going. They'll call you names, she said softly. Troublemaker, attention seeker. They already have, I said. She set her mug down, stepped forward, and pressed her forehead to mine. Make them regret it. I left before the segment aired. I needed to see the neighborhood in motion, Cars were pulling into driveways, people watering flowers, kids riding bikes, and slowly, porch by porch, TVs turned on. Screens flickered behind curtains, a few blinds cracked open wider. At exactly 6:03 p.m., the segment began. I didn't watch it on TV. I watched the reactions. Lorraine's house was still. No movement at the windows. The clubhouse lights, usually on a timer, remained off. But elsewhere, people stood in their driveways with phones out. Heads turned toward other porches. The quiet of the neighborhood wasn't silent anymore. It was charged. By 6:07, my phone buzzed. Evan. Calls already coming in. One board member just quit. Lorraine's losing it. At 6:11, another message. Curtis, someone just knocked on my door and thanked me. Said they'd been scared to speak. At 6:14, the HOA portal crashed. Too many logins at once. And at 6:21, Lorraine herself emerged. I spotted her from 2 houses down, storming out of her home, clipboard in hand, phone pressed to her ear. She was dressed like she always was during HOA functions. Navy slacks, white blouse, hair pulled tight. Except this time, she wasn't hosting a meeting. She was losing control. She walked toward the clubhouse like she meant to reassert her grip, but no one followed her. No one opened the doors. A few neighbors stepped onto their porches, but they didn't wave. They just watched. By 6:33, the segment ended. By 6:35, the first email from a lawyer hit her inbox. I knew this because Lena forwarded it to me. Blacked out names, just a subject line. Unauthorized residential surveillance practices, potential class action inquiry. By sunset, Lorraine Harper was still in the clubhouse, pacing behind the glass like a monarch trapped in her own greenhouse. I didn't gloat, but I didn't look away either. Because for the first time since Elena's medical emergency, since that still frame was turned into a neighborhood memo, since my mailbox became a weapon, the power had shifted, not in my favor, in everyone's. And Lorraine could feel it. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. No surprise, Lorraine had called it barely an hour after the news segment aired. Her subject line, Community Integrity Forum, urgent attendance requested. The message made no mention of the broadcast, the footage, or the resignation of 2 board members earlier that evening. Just language wrapped in crisis management. Misinformation, clarification, misguided accusations. The community center parking lot filled faster than I'd ever seen it. Neighbors usually showed up late for these meetings, if at all, but this time the lot overflowed. People walked in groups, silent, eyes sharp. Curtis stood near the entrance with his ramp-reinforced walker. Mrs. Hargrove leaned on her daughter's arm. Parents who'd never attended a vote before now clutched printouts of fines and HOA emails. They didn't come for policy updates. They came to see the reckoning. I entered through the side door and took a seat near the back. Evan was already inside, seated in the corner with a legal pad and a steel spine. He looked straight ahead, eyes unreadable. Lorraine stood at the front with the remaining 2 board members flanking her like security detail. The clipboard was gone. In its place, a wireless mic and a tight 2-wide smile. "Thank you for attending tonight," she began, voice cool, rehearsed. "I know many of you have concerns following this evening's media attention." The room didn't move. No one nodded. She continued, undeterred. "Let me be perfectly clear. Cypress Ridge has always prioritized safety, order, and the preservation of our community values. Recent allegations aired on Channel 8 were taken wildly out of context, and..." A hand shot up. Mrs. Hargrove. Lorraine paused, not expecting interruption. "Yes," she said tightly. "My grandkids were fined for laughing." Silence. Lorraine blinked. "Ma'am, your citation was issued due to excessive..." "I have the recording. I saw it on the news. You filmed them without permission and used that footage to justify a fine more hands rose." Curtis raised his. "So, did you record my front door every time I got groceries?" Then another. "What about my dog's bark being flagged? You called it disturbance to tranquility." A woman near the window added, "You cited me for improper flower pot alignment. Was that based on footage too?" Lorraine's grip on the mic tightened. "These are operational matters. If you'd like to submit formal reviews..." "We saw the formal review," I said, rising from my seat. Every head turned. "I submitted it," I added, to Channel 8, and to legal counsel. Lorraine straightened, voice thinning. "Mr. Maddox, this is not your forum." "No," I said, "but it's theirs. And they deserve to hear the full truth. Not this filtered version." I walked to the front and turned to face the crowd, not her. The cameras weren't for safety. They were for control, hidden inside gnomes, lanterns, faux bird houses, installed without votes, paid for with miscategorized funds. Backed by threats and silence. Lorraine opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I have vendor contracts. Budget line fraud. Testimony from a board member who resigned today. If you think tonight is about gossip, think again. It's about legal exposure. It's about abuse." Evan stood beside me then. No announcement, no fanfare. He simply held up a stack of copied documents. Every budget sheet, every manipulated vote, every email. I signed some of them. "And I won't hide it anymore." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few clapped. Lorraine raised the mic again, but this time a murmur built from the audience. Movement. A slow gathering of voices, not loud, but steady, like pressure under the floorboards. She looked toward her remaining board members, but neither met her eyes. "Effective immediately," Evan said into his own mic. "I motion for a community vote to remove Lorraine Harper from the HOA presidency, pending a formal audit and third-party investigation." He handed out a printed ballot. Someone seconded it. Then the room shifted. Neighbors stood, walked toward the front. One by one, they filled in boxes, handed over slips. Even those who had never dared to speak before now stood tall. I watched Lorraine take a step back, lips parted, eyes blinking fast. She'd ruled from a pedestal built on silence. And now the silence had turned on her. The vote wasn't even close. 83 ballots were submitted. 79 voted to remove Lorraine Harper. 3 abstained. 1 voted to keep her. She didn't stay to hear the final tally. The moment the numbers hit the whiteboard, she walked out of the community center without a word. No closing statement, no demand for order, just the click of her heels down the tile hallway and the quiet sigh of the door closing behind her. No one followed. For a long moment, the room was still. Then Curtis raised a hand, not to speak, just to lift it into the air, shaking but steady. One by one, others mirrored the gesture. A silent signal, not of rebellion, not of victory, of return, to trust, to privacy, to something this place used to feel like before every porch light felt like a searchlight. I stepped outside into the cool night, the sound of soft conversations behind me. Evan stood nearby, arms crossed loosely, eyes on the sky. "You think she's really gone?" he asked. "No one like her ever really disappears," I said. "But now she doesn't speak for anyone here." He nodded once. "The audit team will come next week. They'll pick through everything, let them." We stood in silence for a minute. Then he said quietly, "You know, this neighborhood never made sense to me. All this perfection. But now it's got scars," I said. "That's better than pretending it's spotless." When I got home, Elena was on the porch, blanket around her shoulders, mug of tea balanced in her lap. She looked up at me and smiled. Not the kind she forced for guests or nurses. The real one. The one she hadn't used since before the first fine arrived. "She's out?" she asked. "She's out." She patted the seat beside her. I sat, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The garden gnome still sat across the street, but someone had draped a piece of cloth over it, some quiet protest by a neighbor. Maybe more would follow. Maybe they'd all be gone by morning. I looked out at the bench across the lawn, the one by the fountain. "I want to go back there," Elena said, reading my thoughts. "Tomorrow." She nodded. In the weeks that followed, the audit team arrived. So did the news vans, just for a day or two. The story spread, briefly viral. HOA, president removed after secret surveillance scheme exposed. There were interviews, a legal complaint drafted. But most importantly, there was change. The cameras came down. A new board formed, smaller, leaner, with strict oversight on every discretionary line item. Curtis joined. So did Mrs. Hargrove's daughter. And yes, Evan returned, not as treasurer, as secretary. He insisted on it. He said it helped him listen better. Elena and I walked the path to the bench again. No footage, no blinking lights. Just the rustle of birds in the trees, the the quiet rhythm of a neighborhood reclaiming its own heartbeat, and a small plaque, freshly installed beneath the fountain, not from the board, but from the community. It read, "Privacy is not a luxury, it's the foundation of peace." I ran my fingers over the lettering and felt something shift in me, the kind of shift that doesn't come from winning. It comes from knowing you refuse to stay quiet. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.